All right, so here's the summary of the echelon method. If possible, we arrange equations so that there is an x1 term in the first equation and an x2 term in the second equation, and so on and so forth. Now, remember, the terms x1 and x2 may sound a little like, what are you talking about? But remember, as we said before, if we look at a linear equation, normally we see ax plus by equals c, where our a, b, and c are constants, meaning numbers, right? But also we could rewrite this as a1x1 plus a2x2 equals k, right? It's still the same thing. So we would be looking at x and y in a traditional linear equation. Or we call it x1, x2. So if it helps for you to substitute y for x2 so that you can understand, or for x3, z, then do that, okay, so that it helps you out. But basically our goal is to make sure in the first equation there's an x1 term, and in the second equation there's an x2 term, and so on and so forth. If there's a third equation, it would be x3. All right, and so then our goal is to eliminate x1 in all of the equations that come after the first equation, and then to eliminate x2 in all the equations that come in after the second equation. And if there's a third equation or more, then you eliminate x3 in every equation that comes after the third equation. So the goal is to continue in this way until the last equation has this form of a times x sub n equals k. Now remember, this whole x sub n just represents like our variables, x, y, z, okay? And then, of course, k is representing our number or constant. After we've gotten that set up, then we multiply each equation by the reciprocal of the coefficient of its first term. Why do we do that? So that that coefficient is 1. And then we use backward substitution to find the value of each variable. So I have an example of a word problem here where Katrina invested in the Coca-Cola stock and Wendy's stock. The Coca-Cola stock currently sells for $40 a share, and the Wendy's stock for $8 a share. Her current investment is worth $6,720. Katrina has a total of 360 shares. The question is, how many shares of each stock does she own? Okay, so whenever we have word problems, a lot of times there are certain recommendations that we have. Of course, read the problem carefully, but then secondly, identify our variables, what must be found. And then we reread the problem in relationship with the variables that we've just defined. And then we look for sentences that lead to an equation. This is the method that is given by the book, and I find no problems with it. A lot of times for me, I just look at the question to help me know what my variables are. So here it said, how many shares of each stock does she own? Well, what are the two stock? Wendy's and Coca-Cola. So shares of Coca-Cola, right? Because each stock. So shares of Coke stock, maybe we'll let that be X, right? And then shares of Wendy's stock, we let that be our Y, right? So that when we reread this problem, we're reading it in terms of with these variables in mind. All right, so this second sentence is talking about how much the Coca-Cola stocks sell for each share, right? And then the Wendy's, that also is mentioned here, where the Wendy's stock is $8 a share. We know how much the investment is. So with all that information, we can actually write our very first equation. So that would be, in this situation, we got Coke. So that was $40 a share plus our Wendy's $8 a share for a total of $6,720. Now, you might think we're done, but there's a little bit of information that's given right here where it says Katrina has a total of 360 shares. All right, so what makes up the number of shares that Katrina has? Coke and Wendy's. So our next equation is going to be the shares for Coke plus the shares for Wendy's gives the total that she has, which is 360 shares. All right, so we've written out our equations. They are linear. They're in standard form. And now we need to actually solve for X and Y so we can know how many shares of Coke she has and how many shares of Wendy's she has. And we're going to use this whole echelon method. Now, remember, we want to basically get rid of the X2 because it says, if possible, arrange equations so that there is an X1 term in the first equation, X2 term in the second equation, but eliminate the X1 term in all equations after the first equation. So the question is, how can we come here and eliminate this X term in the second equation? Question mark. And so with this in mind, we have to think about adding these two equations together and what could possibly happen that will eliminate our X term. So we have to remember our transformation rules, which says that we can multiply an equation by a non-zero number. So let's say we multiply this second equation by negative 40. When we multiply this second equation by negative 40, our result ends up being negative 40x minus 40y equals, let me see if I have that anywhere. Oh man, I need a calculator. I think, I'm not sure. Let me just be honest with myself. I don't know. All right. I need a pause. Hold on, people. All right, this is real life. I had to go and get a calculator. So this is 360 times negative 40, which gave us negative 14,400 is the result here. All right. And then we're just going to bring down that top equation so that we can add it. When we add these two equations together, we do get rid of that X term so that we have negative 32y is equal to negative 7,680. And so if we were to remember, the only reason for this step is to show the work for what we're doing. So what we actually have is our top equation, which is 40x plus 8y equals 6,720. And then negative 32y equals negative 7,680, right? So this is, excuse me, what we have now, right? This is what we have now. So if we're to write what just happened, right, in this step right here, we took negative 40 times our row 2. We added it to row 1 and we replaced it in our row 2. That's what happened. That's how we got this right here. All right, and this right here is the work for it. So now from here, we have to think about what we want. So if we look at our steps, right, it says continue this way until the last equation has the form a number times our variable equals some number. That's really what we have here. Think about it. We got our coefficient, negative 32. Got our variable y is equal to some constant. All right, so we continued until we got there. Now what? It says multiply each equation by the reciprocal of the coefficient of its first term. So here, the first term is 40. So we need to multiply row 1 times the reciprocal of its coefficient. The reciprocal of 40 is 1 over 40. Reciprocal just means flip. And we know that any whole number, like 40, can be written over 1. So the reciprocal is 1 over 40. Okay? So from here, when we do this, when we multiply, what we end up with is x plus 1 over 5y equals 168. All right. And then the next thing we need to do, it says multiply each by its reciprocal. So we have to multiply the second equation by negative 1 over 32. And that result is going to give us y equals 240. So basically, in layman's terms, meaning to put it simply, we're going to solve this bottom equation for the variable y. We know it as dividing by negative 32 on each side. And then once we find our y, which is what we did here, we're going to use back substitution. So that's the final step here. Use back substitution to find the value of each variable. And so basically, now that we know y is equal to 240, we're going to take that 240 and substitute it right here in the top equation so that we have x plus 1 over 5 times 240 equals 168. If we do all that we need to do here, 240 divided by 5 is 48. So this is x plus 48 equals 168. Subtract 48 from each side. And x is equal to 120, right? So we know that there are 120 shares for Coke. So Katrina has 120 shares in Coke or of Coke, I'm going to write. All right. And then how do we know the rest? Well, we know that if X is 120 and the total amount is 360, then all we have to do is subtract 120. And we know that the amount of Wendy's stock is 240. So Katrina has 240 shares in Wendy's. Okay.